Hello, my name is James Hobson. I'm in the Foundations of Public Speaking class. And this week's discussion, I want to start off with a quote. And I do quote from Henry David Thoreau. He says that if the machine of government is of such a nature that it requires you to be an agent of injustice to another, then I say break the law. Another famous quote by Albert Einstein, he says, never do anything against conscience, even if the state demands it. It leads me right into what my topic of discussion is about this week, and that is civil disobedience. In this week's topic, I've learned throughout this week in this class some really pretty important points. First point is, or the first thing rather, is how to form an outline by being informative. And secondly, how to develop a keyword outline. And I also learned how to sharpen and hone my skills on being a good listener. And many times we think we're listening, but oftentimes we're not. And so throughout this week in learning about being a good listener, it is going to help me tremendously as I prepare to go further in this education process, particularly in my business affairs as well as church affairs. Fourthly, we not only have I learned to be a better listener, I've also learned to be a better presenter. Presenting in an organizational manner, and also opening up with better introductions. But getting to our topic this week, the main thing about civil disobedience that we need to understand is that it is a refusal for any citizens to comply with certain rules, laws that would require those individuals to go against what they really stand for and for what they believe. And they do that through nonviolent protest. This week, I want to tell you some pros and cons in regard to what it is to be civil disobedient. And I'm going to use two examples. One example is going to be found from history. And the second example will be found through scripture. And I always like to use scripture. I may use it too much, but I speak from my experiences. I'm well versed in scripture, and I apply it in every aspect of my life. And so my second example will be used from scripture, and then we'll draw some conclusions after we use our examples. The first example from history that I found was through a very popular individual. His name was Gandhi. And Gandhi was from a town called Natal. He was subjected to all types of racism through South African laws. And it restricted him from being not just an Indian man, but a man in general. And one incident in particular which changed Gandhi's life was when he was thrown off a train. And that was pretty much a moment of truth for Gandhi, because Gandhi decided at that point in his life that he would fight for injustice and that he would defend the rights of him as an Indian man and just a man in general, and just as a human in general. All of us feel as if we have rights, and when our rights are violated, we want to see that justice is done. And so that is my first example. And one other thing that we want to note about Gandhi is that Gandhi influenced many of the nonviolent protests that we saw in the United States in the early civil rights movements. He was a great influence to Dr. Martin Luther King and others during that period of time. My second example is a biblical example, and I want to look at the book of Exodus. In the book of Exodus, where we have the ruler, who is Pharaoh, has ordered the annihilation of an entire race. And in his mind, he felt that if he could just kill all of the baby Jewish boys that were born, that he could annihilate an entire race. And he gave an order for the midwives to kill every Jewish boy that was born. But there were two particular midwives that took a stance. Now, if those midwives had an extremist view, they would have said, follow the law to the letter. But in this particular instance, they went against the grain. They decided that we will protest. We will have civil disobedience. And we will go against what the laws of this day were, the etiquette of this time, because it goes against what I believe as a Christian. And just like Paul tells us in the book of Romans chapter 13, we follow the law as long as the law is not against God's law. And so those are two instances of civil disobedience that I wanted to discuss with you tonight. And in conclusion, I chose that topic because precisely of what Paul tells us in Romans chapter 13. He tells us that we are subject to the governing laws. We are subject to all of the rules and the regulations that authorities permit. But as a Christian and for a child of God, if those laws and those etiquettes are against the laws of God, we must practice civil disobedience. We must not allow those laws to be held to a higher standard than God's laws. And we have to make a decision on what we'll do. And that's what we wanted to talk to you about this week. And some of the sources that I used in my presentation, the internet in particular, the Bible, of course, people that I know in general, just talking to, magazines that I've read, and periodicals that I've read. And so I hope this talk has been helpful to you. Signing off.